There's a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone, a feeling you can experience in a crowded room. At a party where everyone seems to speak a language you never quite learned. Family gatherings bring it out. Work environments amplify it. And walking down streets filled with people who seem to belong to something you can't name only makes it worse. What you feel isn't sadness. Not exactly, but more like standing behind glass, watching life happen on the other side, while you wonder why you were never given the manual everyone else seems to have been born with. You felt this sense that you're misaligned with the world at some fundamental level, not broken necessarily, but separate, like you're tuned to a frequency no one else can hear. At 3 a.m, when sleep won't come, this feeling becomes unbearable, and you lie there while the questions start. Why do I feel so different? Why can't I just be normal? Why does everything everyone else finds meaningful feel hollow to me? Why do their certainties feel like prisons? And the worst question, the one that cuts deepest, is something wrong with me. Erich Fromm called this experience alienation, the separation between who we are and who the world demands we become, while existential psychologists speak of it as the authentic self colliding with social expectation, the friction between truth and performance. These clinical terms don't capture the ache of it, the way it follows you through your days like a shadow you can't shake. What you might not know is that 25 centuries ago, in the sun-bleached stone streets of ancient Athens, there walked a man who felt exactly what you feel now. Socrates was his name, and he was perhaps history's most famous outsider, wandering among the citizens who gathered in the agora to buy and sell, to gossip and trade in the currency of social belonging, moving through the crowds like a ghost at his own funeral, asking questions no one wanted to answer. He didn't fit, refused to fit, and Athens eventually killed him for it. But before we get to hemlock and martyrdom, before we explore why societies destroy those who see too clearly, we need to understand something. Socrates wasn't suffering from a disorder, he wasn't broken, and his displacement wasn't a bug in his psychology, but a feature of it. His outsiderness wasn't the problem, but his greatest gift. And maybe, just maybe, yours is too. Because here's what no one tells you when you're lying awake at 3 a.m, feeling like an alien in your own life. The feeling of not belonging might not be a sign that something's wrong with you, but a sign that something's right. That somewhere inside you, a part of your soul has refused to go to sleep. That you've retained the capacity to question what everyone else has simply accepted. The people who belong effortlessly, who slide into social roles like hands into well-worn gloves, aren't happier than you, but just less awake, and they've made a trade you weren't willing to make. Comfort for consciousness, belonging for truth. Socrates understood this better than anyone. Athens operated on a system of unexamined assumptions. People inherited their beliefs, like furniture from their parents, never questioning whether any of it was true, never asking whether the life they were living was actually worth living. He watched them perform certainty about things they'd never thought about, build identities on foundations they'd never inspected, and he couldn't do it, couldn't pretend. So he became the man who asked questions, the gadfly as he called himself, the irritant, the one who wouldn't let people sleep through their lives, and Athens hated him for it, the way the world often hates those who refuse to participate in the collective dream. You know this hatred in your own way, maybe not execution, but the subtler forms of punishment that come when people look at you a certain way. After you ask a question, that disrupts the script. Relationships cool when you can't fake enthusiasm for things that bore you. Career paths close because you won't smile and nod at meetings, where everyone pretends to believe things no one actually believes. The price of seeing clearly is often loneliness, and the cost of staying awake is often exile. But Socrates paid that price consciously, deliberately, choosing philosophical homelessness over false belonging, choosing the examined life over the comfortable lie. And in that choice, he discovered something that might change everything for you. That displacement, when embraced rather than resisted, transforms from suffering into wisdom. That the feeling of not belonging to the world might actually mean you belong to truth instead. Imagine standing in a crowd where everyone is nodding in agreement, and you're the only one who notices no one actually said anything worth agreeing with, which was Socrates' daily existence in the streets of Athens. He'd wander the agora listening to politicians speak with absolute certainty about justice, to priests declare with confidence what the gods wanted, to merchants explain with authority how the world worked. And all Socrates could think was, how do you know that? Have you examined it? Have you questioned it? Or are you just repeating what you've been told? This is the Socratic method, but it's more than a teaching technique. It's a way of being in the world, the refusal to accept inherited wisdom without interrogation, the insistence on examining every assumption, every claim, every certainty that others carry like shields against doubt. And here's what happens when you live this way. You become unbearably lonely, because certainty is the glue that holds communities. Together in shared assumptions create belonging. When everyone agrees that this is good and that is bad, that this career path leads to success and that one to failure, that these beliefs make you righteous and those make you wrong, you have a society, you have identity, you have home. But if you're the person who can't stop asking, but why, but how do we know, but what if we're wrong? You become homeless. You lose access to the warm comfort of groupthink. You stand outside the circle of the certain, shivering in the cold wind of perpetual questioning. The oracle at Delphi, that mysterious priestess who spoke for Apollo himself, once declared Socrates the wisest man in Athens. And when Socrates heard this, he was baffled because he didn't feel wise, but confused, uncertain, surrounded by people who seemed to know things he couldn't grasp. So he went searching for someone wiser than himself to prove the oracle wrong. Questioning the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen, all the people Athens considered wise, and what he discovered shook him. They didn't actually know what they claimed to know. They'd simply never questioned themselves. They possessed the confidence of the unexamined, the certainty of those who've never looked beneath the surface of their own beliefs. And that's when Socrates realized the oracle was right. He was wisest not because he knew more, but because he knew nothing. His wisdom was his displacement, his inability to rest in false certainty, his refusal to pretend understanding where none existed. Modern psychology is finally catching up to what Socrates knew thousands of years ago. Research on intellectual humility, the awareness of the limits of one's knowledge, shows that those who hold their beliefs more lightly, who can say, I might be wrong, who remain open to correction, actually make better decisions, build stronger relationships, and experience less anxiety than those who cling to rigid certainties. But here's the paradox. Intellectual humility requires the courage to feel perpetually unsure, to live without the comfort of absolute answers, to accept displacement as a permanent condition, which means you have to feel out of place because certainty is the place and you've chosen to leave it. You know this feeling intimately. You've sat in rooms where everyone spoke with conviction about things you found deeply questionable. You've listened to family members explain with absolute certainty how life works, what God wants, what success means, who you should become. And inside you, a quiet voice whispered, but what if they're wrong? What if all of this is just inherited performance, unexamined script, collective sleepwalking? That voice is Socratic, and that discomfort is philosophical awakening. But it comes with a terrible cost, because while everyone else builds their lives on the solid ground of certainty, you're stuck in perpetual suspension, unable to fully commit to anything, because you can see too many sides, too many contradictions, too many unanswered questions. Clinicians call this depersonalization in psychology textbooks, the feeling of being detached from yourself and the world, of watching life through a pane of glass, and it's listed in the DSM as a dissociative symptom, something to be treated, cured, eliminated. But what if it's not always pathology? What if sometimes it's perception? What if the glass you're looking through isn't separating you from reality, but clarifying it? What if your inability to belong to false certainties is actually your soul's integrity, showing itself? Socrates would walk through Athens, and people would avoid him, because they knew that if they engaged with him, he'd ask questions that would unravel their carefully constructed worldviews, expose the contradictions in their thinking, the assumptions they'd never examined, the ways their lives were built on foundations they'd never chosen. He was dangerous not because he had answers, but because he refused to stop asking questions. And you're dangerous too, not to society in any grand political sense, but to the small systems of unexamined certainty that people build around themselves for comfort. Your questions threaten their sleep. Your inability to pretend challenges their performance. Your homelessness reminds them that they might be homeless too, just refusing to admit it. This is why they subtly punish you, why they call you too intense or overthinking or difficult, why they eventually stop inviting you to gatherings where everyone nods in agreement about things no one has actually thought about, why relationships fade when you can't participate in the shared delusions that make social life comfortable. But here's what Socrates discovered, and what you need to hear right now: the unexamined life isn't worth living, not because it's morally wrong, but because it's not actually a life. It's a performance of life, a script inherited from others, a role you play until you die without ever knowing who you actually were. Your displacement is the price of actually living. Your outsiderness is the cost of remaining awake. Your loneliness is the consequence of refusing to fall asleep alongside everyone else. And Socrates would tell you, pay the price, stay awake, remain homeless. Because the alternative, the warm comfort of unexamined certainty, the easy belonging of groupthink, the security of never questioning anything, isn't peace but a kind of death you experience while still breathing. The examined life hurts, but at least it's yours. They killed him for asking questions, and that's what it came down to in the end. Athens, the birthplace of democracy, the shining jewel of classical civilization, the city that prided itself on wisdom and philosophy, put Socrates on trial for the crime of making people think. The charges were corruption of youth and impiety toward the gods, but these were just the legal camouflage for the real accusation. He made people uncomfortable. He disrupted the social order. He refused to stop asking questions that had no good answers. And he wouldn't apologize, wouldn't back down, wouldn't soften his position, even when offered the chance to escape, to flee Athens and live out his days in exile. Even when given the opportunity to propose his own punishment, something lenient that would let him survive, he suggested that Athens should reward him instead, give him free meals for life as a public benefactor for the service he'd provided the city. They handed him the hemlock and he drank it, calmly, still talking about the immortality of the soul, still questioning, even at the threshold of death. You need to understand what happened here because it's still happening now. It's happened to you in smaller ways that didn't involve poison but still tasted like death. Terror management theory in psychology explains why societies do this. When someone questions the fundamental assumptions that give a culture meaning, the beliefs about what's good, what's true, what makes life worth living, they trigger existential anxiety in everyone around them and remind people that the meanings we cling to are fragile, constructed, possibly arbitrary. And humans can't tolerate that anxiety. So we defend our worldviews with ferocity. We silence the questioners. We exile the dissidents. We eliminate one way or another those who threaten the shared dream that keeps our terror at bay. Socrates threatened Athens not with violence or revolution, but with something far more dangerous: doubt. He showed people that their certainties were questionable, their traditions potentially hollow, their unexamined lives possibly wasted, and for that he had to die. You haven't been executed, but you've been killed in subtler ways, socially executed in 1,000 small moments. When you questioned the family religion, they stopped looking at you the same way. When you couldn't pretend to care about the things your peers found meaningful, they gradually excluded you. When you pointed out contradictions at work, suddenly you weren't a team player anymore. The world has 1,000 ways of administering hemlock to those who won't stop asking questions, and it doesn't need literal poison when it has isolation, professional marginalization, social exile, the quiet death of being slowly erased from communities that once claimed to value you. And you face a choice Socrates faced. Do you apologize? Do you pretend? Do you soften your questions? Dull your perceptions, learn to nod along with certainties you don't feel? Do you trade your integrity for belonging, your truth for acceptance, your soul for a seat at the table? Or do you drink the hemlock in your own way? Do you accept exile as the price of staying true to yourself? Do you choose loneliness over lying, displacement over false belonging? This is the brutal arithmetic of the examined life. Authenticity cost you community. Honesty cost you connection. Seeing clearly cost you the comfort of shared illusion. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than what society demands. And he was clear about the price. You will be alone, because the individual by definition stands apart from the collective. The person who questions the group's assumptions cannot remain fully within the group. You've watched this happen in real time. Whistleblowers get destroyed not because they lied, but because they told truths no one wanted to hear. People who spoke uncomfortable realities get labelled as troublemakers, as mentally unstable, as enemies of the common good, and you've seen how societies protect themselves from consciousness by eliminating the conscious. And you've felt the temptation, the pull to just shut up, to just go along, to stop asking the questions that isolate you, to perform certainty you don't feel, to fake enthusiasm for values you don't hold, to become whoever they want you to be so you can finally belong somewhere. Socrates could have done this, could have stopped teaching, stopped questioning, kept his thoughts to himself and lived quietly, been accepted, died peacefully in his bed surrounded by a community that tolerated him because he'd learned to tolerate their illusions. But he chose the hemlock instead, not because he wanted to die, but because life without the freedom to question, to examine, to remain true to his philosophical calling, wasn't actually life, but just another form of death, slower but more corrosive than any poison. This doesn't mean you have to become a martyr, because Socrates' choice was his own, shaped by his moment in history, his particular character, his relationship with Athens, and your choice will be different. But you do have to make a choice, and you can't avoid it forever. Either you find ways to live authentically within a world that punishes authenticity, or you surrender your authenticity for the world's approval. Either you accept displacement as your permanent address, or you pretend to belong to places that were never truly home. And here's what you need to understand. The world will not make this easy for you. It will offer you 1,000 small opportunities to betray yourself. It will reward your compliance and punish your honesty. It will make belonging contingent on your willingness to stop asking questions. And every day, in small ways, you'll have to choose the examined life or the easy one, the truth or the comfort, Socrates or Athens. Just know that if you choose as Socrates, you won't be alone, but in the company of every questioner, every outsider, every person throughout history who chose integrity over inclusion, who drank their own version of hemlock rather than poison their own soul with convenient lies. That's a different kind of belonging, lonelier, yes, but truer. So where does this leave you now, awake in a sleeping world, exiled from the easy certainties that give others comfort, perpetually displaced from communities that require you to pretend in order to belong? And the question becomes, what do you actually do with this? How do you live? Socrates left you an answer, though it's not the kind of answer you were hoping for, not a solution that makes the displacement go away, not a trick that lets you finally belong, but something stranger and more profound. The acceptance that displacement itself can become your home. The examined life, Socrates' famous declaration that the unexamined life isn't worth living, isn't a destination you reach, but a way of walking. The choice to keep questioning even when questioning isolates you, to keep seeing even when seeing hurts, to remain awake even when sleep would be easier. And here's what happens when you commit to this path. The very thing that felt like your brokenness begins to reveal itself as your strength. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz and wrote about finding meaning in the most meaningless suffering imaginable, and he understood something you need to hear. We don't get to choose whether life will displace us, whether we'll suffer, whether we'll feel like outsiders, but we do get to choose what our displacement means. You can experience it as random suffering, or you can transform it into purposeful questioning, and that choice changes everything. Your feeling of not belonging, when you stop fighting it, when you stop seeing it as a problem to solve, becomes a philosophical position, becomes a vantage point, and you're not broken but standing in a different location than most people. And from that location, you can see things they can't. The people who belong effortlessly, who never question their culture's assumptions, who slide smoothly into social roles and feel at home in the world, they have comfort, but they don't have perspective. They're inside the painting and unable to see the frame. You're outside the painting, and yes, it's colder out here, yes, it's lonelier, but you can see the whole picture in ways they never will. Socrates called himself a gadfly, an annoying insect that bites the great lazy horse of society to keep it from falling asleep. And he didn't see his outsiderness as exile from the city, but as service to the city. Because Athens needed him precisely because he didn't belong, precisely because he refused to stop asking uncomfortable questions. Every society needs its gadflies. Every culture needs people who can't stop questioning, who won't accept inherited wisdom without examination, who remain perpetually uncomfortable with comfortable lies because without them societies calcify. They stop evolving. They start repeating the same unexamined patterns until those patterns destroy them. You are one of these people, and your displacement isn't just personal suffering, but a necessary position in the ecosystem of human consciousness, because the world needs people who can't belong too easily, who notice when everyone's nodding in agreement about things that don't make sense, who ask the questions no one wants to answer. This doesn't make the loneliness disappear, doesn't magically give you community, but it reframes the loneliness from meaningless suffering into meaningful vocation. And you're not alone because you're broken, but because you're performing a function that requires standing apart. And here's the secret Socrates discovered. There is a community, it's just scattered across time and space. The invisible fellowship of questioners, the people throughout history who've chosen the examined life over the comfortable illusion, who've felt what you feel, who've walked the path you're walking. You'll probably never meet most of them. They might live in different centuries, different continents, different circumstances. But when you read their words, when you encounter their thoughts, you'll recognize yourself and feel less alone because you'll realize others have stood where you stand. Others have chosen what you're choosing. Socrates is dead 25 centuries, but he's with you right now, in this moment, in your 3 a.m. questioning, in your inability to belong to false certainties. And Marcus Aurelius is with you. Simone Weil is with you. Every person who ever chose truth over comfort, consciousness over sleep, integrity over inclusion, they are all with you. An invisible chorus of fellow outsiders. This is how you find home in homelessness. You stop looking for home in the world's approval and start finding it in the examined life itself. You make a home in your own consciousness, in your commitment to questioning, in your refusal to live unexamined, and you belong to truth instead of belonging to tribes. You find your people not in physical proximity, but in shared commitment to staying awake. And practically, daily, moment by moment, you learn to hold it lightly. You learn that you can engage with the world, participate in society, maintain relationships without requiring those things to give you the belonging you once desperately wanted. And you can be in the world without needing the world to validate your existence. You can ask your questions more gently, less aggressively, not because you're surrendering your truth, but because you've learned that people need to arrive at their own questions in their own time, and you can create space for others to examine their lives without forcing them to defend their unexamined assumptions. You can find the other questioners, the scattered few in every community, who also feel displaced, who also can't stop asking why, and you can build smaller, stranger, more authentic connections with fellow outsiders. Relationships based on shared questioning rather than shared certainties. And maybe most importantly, you can be gentle with yourself. You can stop seeing your displacement as a personal failing. You can stop trying to fix yourself into belonging. You can accept that the examined life will always feel a little lonely, a little uncomfortable, a little estranged from the easy certainties everyone else inhabits. Because you've made a trade whether you realized it or not. You've traded comfort for consciousness, belonging for truth, the easy sleep of the unexamined life for the difficult wakefulness of perpetual questioning. Socrates made that trade and drank the hemlock rather than surrender it. And you're making it too. Every day you choose to remain awake, every moment you refuse to pretend, every time you honor the questions inside you, even when those questions isolate you from the sleeping world. Welcome home, gadfly. Welcome to the examined life.